Welcome everyone and thank you for joining. My name is Hanna van Kolfschoten. I'm a researcher at the University of Basel in Switzerland, and I have a background in law. So I'm specialized in regulation of artificial intelligence and the impact on fundamental rights. I mainly look at the context of health, but today I will also be discussing with you a bit broader implications of AI and disinformation. So I'll mainly be talking about the role of EU law and to what extent the law we have right now actually protects people against the risks that are created by AI generated disinformation. To start, it's important to understand what exactly is new about this debate of generative AI and disinformation. Also, because, of course, online disinformation has been around for a long time. But what we see happening with the increase of easily accessible Gen AI tools is that it makes it much easier to create all kinds of misleading content. And then we're talking about deep fake, so that's mainly misleading video or image content, but also fake news and fake personas. Because the fact that Gen AI is now available to anyone at very low cost also really increases the speed and the scale at which disinformation is spread. The cost is much lower, and also the apparent quality of this misleading content is increasing. So we see that this problem is not entirely new, but it is amplified and it's also transformed in a way. Because another issue is not just that it's easier to create the content, but also the spreading goes much quicker because you can also use AI tools to create automated bots to spread disinformation, and also it's easier to really target specific people you want to reach with your disinformation because AI is very good at detecting patterns in large data sets. So all of this changes the debate about disinformation. And we can see this in different contexts. So one context I would like to discuss with you is how we see that deep fakes are used more and more in politics, but also in the context of news and of crime. So I collected some recent newspaper articles where you can see how this is increasing. So on the top you see that a couple of weeks ago there was research published that in the months running up to the US midterm campaigns, there's much more and more AI deepfakes appearing on the internet that are really released with a goal of influencing what people will vote in these elections. And also here you see that politicians are really worrying about what the effect of that is on voters and also how they can stop this, because now it's very difficult to distinguish a deepfake from a real video. Another recent example is the increase of AI pictures of the war in Iran. There were a lot of fake photos and videos around created by AI, and it was really difficult for people to understand what was actually happening, what were real photos, what was misleading information, and also who were the actors spreading this information. And finally, we also see that deepfakes are used more and more to mislead people for financial objectives, so to commit fraud. And a little example of that is that it's now possible from only a few audio files to mimic somebody's voice, and then you can use those voice recordings to for example, place a fake call to a family member asking for money. And also this use of deep fakes is spreading. Another really big concern we have is health disinformation. Also here I collected some recent examples, and one example you see at the top is about Google AI summary. So you have this right now if you go on the internet and you type a question, then first a little box appears with an AI summary of your question. So Google automatically generating an answer to that. And there you also see a lot of inaccurate and also false information when people ask fairly simple health questions. This can also adversely impact people's health. Another example is that there's more and more deep fakes of doctors going around on social media where they are spreading health misinformation. So topics are often vaccine hesitancy, but also that some medicines would work well for certain diseases. And this is concerning because they use actual images of actual doctors that are also active on social media. So it's very difficult for users to distinguish between real content and fake content, and can also, of course, lead to bad effects for people's health if they follow this advice. And then finally, a study from Nature showed that there's also a lot of targeted misinformation attacks on medical large language models. So this is targeted manipulation of fake information about health with the idea that it would then end up in these models when people ask questions about their health. And also here we see that it's mainly related to big fake news campaigns related to medicines and vaccinations that are already broader apparent on the internet. This is another study. It's from B&J Open and was published earlier this month. And it's about how people are increasingly using AI chatbots for health information. So they tested in different chatbots what kind of health disinformation was going around when people would ask certain questions about their health. So they tested for questions related to vaccines, cancer treatment, stem cells, athletic performance, and nutrition. And the outcome was that a lot of health disinformation that has been going around for a long time was actually also present in all of these different AI chatbots that were tested. So also this has big effects for people's health if they indeed start using more AI chatbots rather than going to a health professional when they are unwell or when they're in need of healthcare. So just to summarize a bit, if we talk about AI-generated health disinformation, what could go wrong? First of all, we have the case of unsafe health decisions. So people are convinced by the answer the AI chatbot gave them or the outcome from their Google search to take certain health decisions that can lead to ineffective treatments or harmful treatments or no treatment at all, thereby creating direct risk for people's health. Another big risk we see is that these AI systems are also exploiting people's vulnerabilities. So, for example, if they know that people are using certain systems to talk about mental health issues, then it can be even more detrimental for their health and for their rights if they are exploiting these people that are anxious or ill or searching for serious answers. At a broader level, we also see that it has implications for prevention strategies from the government. So, for example, if the government is giving out public health information about one topic and then people get the opposite information from their AI searches, then this can be very harmful for public health strategies and also undermine them. And eventually this can also lead to an erosion of trust in health professionals and also in institutions. And we also have some recent examples of this in the news. So already in the US, 60% of the adults first use AI before they go to a doctor, which also means that many of them do not access healthcare anymore at all. Which also means that the power of these health disinformation venues grows a lot. And in some severe cases, this exploitation of vulnerable individuals, especially young people, has even led to people taking their own life after they were convinced to do so by talking a lot with AI chatbots. So here we see that there's a lot that can go wrong if we leave this AI disinformation in the field of health unregulated. Now, a big question is how the EU responds to these issues. And when we look at the legal system in the EU, we see that there's no single law on disinformation, but instead the EU has a lot of different laws and in that sense really a layered regulatory system. And this includes, when we talk about health, it includes sector-specific legislation, so legislation on health. It also includes, since recently, the AI Act. There's a Digital Services Act and also a Disinformation Code. We have consumer law and we also have a European Media Freedom Act. And each of these laws addresses a different part of the problem. So we talk about the AI system itself, we talk about platforms, we talk about markets and also about media. So what I will do in the next part of the presentation is I will take you through all these laws and show you how they have some benefits, but also have some limitations when it comes to addressing the problems we just discussed. So first of all, you have these health-specific protections. So health is a very regulated sector, and when we talk about health disinformation becoming available and widely spreading because of AI, it's also important to look at how our health laws are currently addressing this. So there's different laws on patient safety, there's also laws on clinical performance of medical devices. When we talk about the relationship between doctors and patients, there's also medical ethics that are often incorporated into law. And when a patient suffers harm, there's also all kinds of rules about medical liability to get the harm compensated. But the problem here is that even though many of the AI chatbots that people ask their health questions to are not in a legal sense medical devices, because they say themselves, we are not meant to serve a medical purpose. They put disclaimers also in their system saying, if you have a medical question, you should consult your doctor. And that also means that they fall out of this category that regulates the medical devices, even though that they may still influence health decisions. Because this system that we have for AI medical devices is dependent on what is the purpose of the manufacturer making the device. So in this sense, where people use AI tools that were not really made to answer health questions, this whole health framework doesn't offer any protection. Then we have an Artificial Intelligence Act, and this is now, since last year, the EU central law on AI. And what it does, it introduces very strict rules for high-risk systems, and the law determines what is a high-risk system. So, for example, it has said that medical devices are high risk, so they should comply with a stricter rule regime in this AI Act. Also, the AI Act prohibits certain manipulative and deceptive AI practices. It has some transparency obligations. For example, it requires the users to be informed when they interact with AI. And they also required to disclose when there is AI-generated content. Another positive thing about the AI Act is that for general purpose AI models, so the big generative AI models, it requires them to consider the systemic risks, so also the risk that these big systems could pose to public health. So these are all good things, but some limitations of the AI Act is that there is no obligation at all of accuracy, which may be what we're looking for in this case. So AI systems are not required to provide correct health information. And another big shortcoming is that most of the AI systems are actually classified as limited risk. So that means that only the very light rule regime applies to them. And also even though we have these transparency rules, we also know from empirical studies that actually transparency doesn't really prevent people from being misled. So they could still believe certain health information because it's presented in a very convincing way, or because they've read it also in other places. So transparency is not enough to protect people against health disinformation. Then we have a Digital Services Act. And the idea of the Digital Services Act is actually that it is to protect against misinformation, also AI-generated content, and it regulates platforms. And one of the good things is that it specifically targets systemic risks. So platforms such that's mainly the very large online platforms and search engines as well. They are required to assess and also mitigate risks they see occurring also in relation to public health, but also democracy and fundamental rights. And this is important because if you, it's not just the creation is harmful, but also the way that it's spread. So the scale, and that is mainly through these big platforms. And another development within this Digital Services Act is that there's now a code of conduct on disinformation, which is integrated into this legal framework. And this used to be only voluntary, but now it's also a recognized code of conduct. So it means that there's also it's a benchmark for compliance of platforms. So if they show that they comply with this code of conduct, then also they can show that they comply with the act. So here also in the code of conduct, you see that platforms have to commit to measures such as transparency, labeling of AI-generated content, but also cooperating with fact checkers. So that's all good measures when we talk about combating AI disinformation, especially in the field of health. But there's also some shortcomings, and I think the main one is that this DSA, it focuses on platforms, so not on the AI systems themselves, but on the platforms. So it's more focusing on how the misinformation is spreading, but not how it's generated. And another shortcoming is that it's mainly reactive. Most interventions only occur after the content has already gone viral. And that can be especially problematic for very persuasive content like AI-generated health advice or deep fakes, because then people are already convinced about the information being true before it is taken offline, for example. And also there are some questions about enforcement still, because many of these measures are voluntary, and also because not every platform that misinformation is spread qualifies or classifies as this very big platform, so they don't have to comply with this law. Then another field of law that could be helpful when we talk about health disinformation is consumer law. So the EU has different directives that are already around since the beginning of the century. So I will focus on 3 of them. There's a unfair commercial practices directive, a consumer rights directive, and an unfair contract terms directive. And each of them does play a role in this disinformation debate, but they operate mainly from market-based logic, which is not always helpful. So to give you an example, the unfair commercial practice directive, it prohibits misleading commercial practices, which could in principle also include false health claims generated by AI, especially when these are tied to a product, for example, medicines. And the Consumer Rights Directive, it focuses on transparency in contracts. So it makes sure that people are involved about pricing and about subscriptions, also when they use AI tools. And then the Unfair Contracts Terms Directive looks at imbalances in contractual relationships. So, for example, if as a consumer you use an AI tool, but then the company tries to exclude liability or has very unfair data sharing conditions. So there are some limitations when we look at how this is useful for AI-generated health disinformation. And that's, first of all, also because none of these directives impose a duty of accuracy. So there's no requirement that AI systems have correct or clinically safe health information. Another shortcoming is that the focus is mainly on transactions, so still not on the quality of the information. And it's also, this whole consumer law model is really focused on individual harm. While actually when we talk about the large-scale spread of misleading information, for example, about vaccines, then that is more of a systemic risk because it has also impact on public health and how people trust the healthcare system in a country. And another thing is that these directives are not really engaging with the technical features of AI systems, such as hallucinations, but also the more persuasive design that you have when you have a conversation with a chatbot. And actually this is often central to how misinformation is generated and also how it's spreading quicker and quicker. And this part is something that actually the EU is thinking about taking up in a new consumer law framework, which looks a bit more at these design features of AI. So that could be helpful in the future. Then we have finally a European Media Freedom Act. And this act plays a more indirect but still an important role in addressing misinformation. And its main strength is that it looks at editorial responsibility. So this is about media actors, the classical ones from TV to newspapers. And they have to apply professional standards. They have to do fact-checking, and they cannot only use AI to do the fact-checking. So here, in a context where AI is capable of generating really big volumes of misleading health information, it's very important that in this law there's still a big emphasis on editorial accountability. And also mainly on human oversight. But there's also some limitations, and these are quite clear in this space because the scope is very narrow, because it only applies to the media sector, so not to this broader ecosystem where AI is often produced and also consumed, so the chatbots, the app, the social media platforms. So also for AI chatbots, it's not relevant. And another limitation is that the Act doesn't have any concrete direct rules on mis and disinformation. So it doesn't regulate the accuracy of content, or it also doesn't have obligations to prevent misleading outputs. So it's mainly looking at the supply of trustworthy information, but it's not directly relevant for generation or also the spread of AI-driven health disinformation. So what does EU law do well? Overall, EU law does several things quite well when it comes to AI and disinformation. First, it adopts really this holistic and multi-layered approach. So instead of relying on a single instrument, it relates the different parts of the ecosystem. So AI systems through the AI Act and platforms through the Digital Services Act, and media through the European Media Freedom Act. And this also reflects the reality that misinformation is not a single problem, but a more complex system of interactions. I think it's also positive that EU law focuses on systemic risks, so not only the individual piece of content and the individual harms. And also, this is important because the harm of AI-generated disinformation also comes from scale and not just from one misleading statement. And another positive thing is that the EU combines this more hard law, so the one you can enforce in court, with also softer regulation, codes of conduct, co-regulation, involving also relevant platforms and stakeholders. And I think that also is important in this environment of fast-changing technology. And finally, it's very visible that EU law is grounded in this strong fundamental rights framework. So it really tries to balance this fight against disinformation, also in the field of health, with also the protection of freedom of expression and access to information. And this is important when we talk about regulating disinformation in democratic societies. So these are some things that I think are good about EU law. At the same time, there are also, of course, a lot of clear and important limitations. So first of all, EU law only regulates disinformation indirectly. So it focuses on the systems, the platforms, but it doesn't directly regulate whether information is true or false. And that means that eventually that misleading health information can still circulate even when the environment is regulated. I think another shortcoming is that there is no right to accurate information, even in contexts where accuracy is very crucial, such as health. And also there is for AI systems no legal obligation to provide reliable or evidence-based outputs, also not when it comes to health. So I think that sometimes there is a bit of a mismatch in focus of the EU law, so that it focuses more on system design and on risk management, while there's also often harm at the more individual content and individual user level. For example, this chatbot giving incorrect medical advice, that is now not covered by any strict regulation. And also we see that especially in this field of health, the protection is relatively weak because the tools that influence health decisions, they're not classified as medical devices, so they're not covered by the strictest frameworks from healthcare, but there's also no other frameworks applicable to them. And then I also think that right now there's a big gap in regulation when it comes to these new forms of AI interaction that are also increasingly spreading disinformation, also health disinformation, such as these chatbots. And especially these systems can be very persuasive because they're very personalized and also trusted by users. But currently they're not really fully captured by the legal categories that we have. Such as the DSA, because it's not a platform. So while there is some strong parts about the EU framework, it does not fully align with how this new reality of AI-generated health disinformation now is working in practice. So some conclusions. There's both benefits but also risks and limits to the EU framework we have right now when it comes to AI disinformation. It's good that it's a multi-layered approach. It's good that there's focus on systemic risks and that we look at fundamental rights. But we still only have indirect regulation of misinformation. We don't have this right to accurate information. And there is really clearly a gap for health-specific harms. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.